I'm very excited to be joined by Stephen Orlins, who is the president of the National Committee on U.S.China Relations. You were also the former managing director at Carlyle Asia. So you were one of 100 experts, business leaders, diplomats that signed this letter to Trump saying that treating China as an enemy is the wrong approach and it's hurting America. What's the response you've been hearing from leaders in the U.S.?
Well, there's been a mixed response, I would say. Initially there were 100 people, 100 experts that signed it, former government officials, leading academics, leading business people. Now, in the last week, we've had an additional 50 people sign it, so we're now up to 150. There are also those who fundamentally believe we're wrong and that we should have this policy of treating China as a potential enemy. And they have written to us and appeared on media stating that, we are fundamentally wrong. The good part of this is we're having a debate, that it's important that the United States, the people of the United States, debate what this policy should be. If you go back to December of 2017, when the national security strategy of the United States said, we view China as a revisionist power and a strategic competitor, there was no discussion of whether that was the right policy or not. Now, almost 2 years later, year and a half later, we're finally having that debate. And it's important because ultimately the American people are going to make the right decision. And the views conveyed in that letter of don't treat China as an enemy, work with the reformers in China to enable them to enact reform in China is the right policy. And the people of the United States are going to make the right decision.
And you've been meeting with many political leaders here in Beijing. What's the position or change in sentiment that you're hearing? Have positions hardened, or are you more optimistic?
I think positions since the break-off of negotiations, despite what happened in Osaka, that there was an agreement between President Trump and President Xi to continue the negotiations, I think the positions on both sides have hardened. Each side blames the other for the breakdown in negotiations. I also think that opposed to the ZTE decision, when we banned business, when the United States government banned business with ZTE, a lot of people in China understood that ZTE was a bad actor, and they kind of accepted that decision. The Huawei ban is a different kettle of fish, that people feel that that is a statement that the United States is trying to decouple from China, is trying to impede Huawei from being a global company. And it's not a state-owned enterprise, people here believe. They believe it's a private enterprise, and United States actions are unfounded. So since then, there has been a real hardening in the Chinese position. No. And my meetings with officials, my meetings with both higher and lower level officials suggest that this hardening is not something that's going to ease in the next few weeks.
And a surge of nationalist sentiment among the populace as well. And you've also been traveling to some half a dozen areas in China, speaking with businesses, American and Chinese businesses in China. What are you seeing? Are you concerned about the economic environment?
I am concerned that there is a discrepancy between the data on economic growth and what I'm hearing from these businesses. That we see in the data, we see a slight slowing. But what we see when I talk to these businesses is a slowing in some cases, and in other cases, an actual contraction. That we're seeing not only, you don't ask, is the growth slower than last year? The question is the sales are actually lower than last year. And in a lot of cases, in Guangzhou, in Shenzhen, in Jiangsu province, I'm seeing businesses that actually have declining sales.
In specific sectors?
In specific sectors.
Which ones?
Automotive would certainly be one. Light industry, those who are dependent on exports, are certainly another area where we're seeing not slowing growth, but contraction. We're seeing some. One of the things I noticed was after Trinjia this year, after Spring Festival this year, some workers didn't come back to their factories because they knew there wasn't going to be enough work for them. That the owners basically said, "Well, don't all come back because we're not going to be running at capacity, so don't bother."
And lastly, we are seeing a chorus of complaints about China on both sides of the aisle. How do you see the 2020 elections impacting the relationship, and does it substantially change if a Democrat is elected?
I think it changes somewhat, but not substantially. As you point out, seems to be a consensus on both sides of the aisle that we need to be tougher on China. I think what our letter intended to do is kind of send a signal to both sides of the aisle that this policy of demonizing China is not in the interests of the American people or the American public, that it's actually damaging to Americans. So hopefully when we have a new administration that has folks who are not as committed to protectionism, we'll see better policies towards China. We'll also see an end of the demonization of China. We need a president who basically stands up and say, China's not perfect. We know China's not perfect, but it's important that we adopt policies that are nuanced, that enable the reformers in China to be able to kind of enact reform within China.